And Americans, like everybody else, enjoy a good laugh. See how this goes. Okay. So, humor is something that American culture shares with all other cultures. Every culture has its own humor. And humor is, as my little graphic suggests, kind of the lubricant that holds societies together. Because as much as maybe you and I like to be logical and thoughtful, organized, that's not how human beings really are most of the time. It's kind of an exception when we actually are rational and thoughtful. Um, but humor has a place, and it's actually some people see humor as another way of finding the truth, of seeing the truth. So I'm going to talk about some aspects of humor in general, and then I'm going to talk about what Americans laugh at, what Americans find humorous. So you have some idea. Um, and I guess the thing is, as always, when I say Americans, I'm talking about a really broad group of people, and we have a lot of shared interest and a lot of shared um, things, but we have probably more shared disagreements than agreements. But that's still part of the bond that holds us all together and makes us one culture. We are a culture of people who are constantly in disagreement with themselves. It's just what we do. That's a consequence of free speech. And free speech is a good thing in my mind. I think it's one of the essential freedoms, but it is not always fun, and it's not always pleasant or pretty. So let's take a look. Okay, so humor can be I've divided into three kinds. You can analyze humor in a lot of different ways, and if you were a comedian, if you were a person that specialized in humor, I'm sure you'd find all kinds of ways to analyze humor and the lack of humor in the human beast. Um, but I think a lot of humor depends on your perspective. It can be funny, just plain funny. It can be illuminating. This is the best humor, helps us find a truth, helps us understand the truth. But it can also be cruel, because part of what humor does in every society uh, is to help to define that society, help to define different groups within that society. So in some cultures that are more homogenous, where basically most people in the society agree on the values, on what's important, one predominant religion, one predominant philosophy, one predominant way of looking at the government, well, there's not probably quite as much cruel humor, except that maybe we laugh about the people outside. If you're a culture like the United States, where you have literally hundreds of different kinds of people, basically the United States in a lot of ways reflects all the cultures of the world. We have increasingly no predominant group within society. Yeah, I know. There's always the very rich. They're always, in the end, they're the predominant ones. But for the rest of us, there's a variety of groups, and I think each group seeks a certain amount of social cohesion by either making up funny things about themselves or making up funny things about others. I guess a sign of a healthy culture, to my mind, is where you can have jokes about one another, and no one gets too insulted. There are a lot of jokes in um, American culture about the Irish, about the Scotch, about old people, about people with beards. And since I'm kind of secure in all those identities, I don't really get too upset when I hear that kind of joke. On the other hand, if you're someone who's in a group that feels like they're um, at the bottom, that they are not in control, that they're not powerful, then maybe you take those kinds of jokes a lot more seriously or a lot differently. So again, it's back to it. A lot of humor depends on perspective. One person's laugh is another person's tears. Okay, so the three key things that we're going to, whoops, why did it do that? Okay, so we've got plain old funny humor, and we'll talk about that a little bit as we go on. But basically, that's Mickey Mouse. It's funny creatures wandering around, Donald Duck. It's things that are funny and entertaining that don't have any particular threat to anyone, and that almost everyone in your culture, no matter how divided it may be, or united it may be, can sit down and enjoy it. And that's probably why places these days, it's a little controversial, but generally speaking, places like Disney World and Universal, where they that are centers of entertainment, without a political or a religious or any kind of particular focus, a lot of people go there. A lot of people want to go there because of that. Okay, so that's happy humor, and it looks like I jumped ahead on myself. So let me see if I can get this turned around. Okay. Then there's illuminating humor, and this is the kind of humor that teachers think they have. That, oh, okay, I make a joke, but it's so my students can see the truth, so they can loosen up a little bit, because we again, as much as I love logic and analysis and those types of things, sometimes we can become so caught up in those things that we miss a lot of the more emotional aspects of a particular subject that we're involved with. And what really good comedians do, what really good humorists do, is help us to look at something that's going on in society, something that we may be arguing about, something that we may be critical of, and to just kind of look at it in maybe a little gentler way, or even in a sometimes it's not beautiful, but it look at it in a different way, that we go through something, maybe a ridiculous story, and in the end we arrive at something where we go, you know, that's probably true. We'll come back to that one too. And then there's the cruel humor. There's just making fun of other people because of who they are. It's a little bit like the logic. You know, are we going to engage in rational logic based on merits, or are we going to engage in this pathos stuff, or the things in which we basically attack people for how they look, attack people for things that have nothing to do with them? There's always plenty of people that are willing to do that, because it's easier to engage in that kind of humor that has no purpose other than to go, me and my friends, we're good, and you're different. Maybe your hair color, skin color, religion, whatever is different, and therefore we're going to laugh at you. That makes us stronger. It makes you weaker, except that it works the reverse also. So humor's kind of a mixed creature. All right, now that entertaining kinds of humor, the fun kinds of humor that basically everyone can enjoy, kind of disappears after you're about 10, but a lot of the humor of the early days of your youth is a little more in the gentler, funner kind of humor. The classic for Americans is, of course, Mickey Mouse. Mickey, he's never mean. He's never anything except dancing and happy, and he just sees the best side of life, and we all go, oh boy, I wish I could be like, Steamboat Willie, which is Steamboat Willie is Mickey Mouse's original name. The first film that Walt Disney came out with in 1928 was called Steamboat Willie, and I'm showing it with a little bit of a color to it, but it was really a black and white film about this mouse that's driving a boat up and down the river. That's pretty much the story. But it was amusing. It had nice music, and people found it entertaining. Now these guys, I'm presenting them as an example of entertainment, but I think so. Most people, I guess, a lot of people find things amusing when bad things happen to other people, particularly if we know that they're just going to get up and walk away. All right, let's return to the illuminating kind of humor, the kind of humor that we do with the idea that we're trying to reveal a truth. Now, a lot of comedians don't get, too wrapped in that, but some of the better comedians, the kinds that we think call stand-up comedians, the kind of comedian that walks in and they just have a microphone and they start speaking, so that what they have to show is almost entirely about the words they can use and the picture that they can create in your mind. And they succeed if they start out with something that they maybe just sounds funny in like a ha-ha kind of way, and people are laughing at it, and then suddenly they realize that maybe it has something to do with them, and that maybe the comedian has uncovered some truth. This guy is one of the best, or was one of the best. He died, 15 years ago. But George Carlin was a fabulous comedian. There's a lot of very good comedians still out there. At its best, this kind of comedian appears in clubs. Everybody sits around and drinks a beer or drinks something, and they listen to these guys, and they have funny things to say. Among his funny things to say would be the caterpillar does all the work, but the butterfly gets the publicity. If you think about it, that translates to people. Men are from Earth, women are from Earth. Deal with it. This is a lot of his kind of humor is basically looking at things that are kind of ridiculous in society. At the time that he was making this comment, there were books out, and there were people discussing how, well, men are from Mars and women are from Venus, and this is how we're different, and this is why we're different. And he's going, well, no, those people aren't from those foreign planets. They have to all be from here. It's just the truth. So, well, if crime fighters fight crime and firefighters fight fires, who do freedom fighters fight? That one requires a little more thought, but I think if you think through it, you'll see that some of the wording, some of the way that people are presented in the news is a little odd sometimes. Then there's some people see things as they are and ask why. And some people dream of things as they aren't and never were and ask, why not? Then there's some people who have to go to work and don't really care about all that. If you don't find this amusing, some people do. I do. But he may not be for everyone, but that's a type of comedy. I picked Mean Girls. Mean Girls there's a movie called Mean Girls, but it's a general expression in American English, and it basically refers to the kind of women, really girls, younger women in school who kind of form cliques, and they pick on other people, and they choose people to say bad things about, and they think it's hilarious as this group that is depicted here, but they may just be being mean, and it's a way of saying, well, our group is cool. Our group is a good group. An illustration, if you've ever seen the movie Grease, which is about America in the 1950s, high school drama, and there's a group in there called the Pink Ladies, and the Pink Ladies think they're just so cool, and anybody who's not the Pink Ladies, they're just, they're people, but they're not really in the in crowd. So that's a type of humor, which can be unpleasant. And then there's just kind of the general American attitude towards humor, which is don't take yourself too seriously. We like to find what's humorous about things, and at least Americans of my generation, Americans of a certain way of looking at the country, like to find something in the middle and not take anything so seriously that we can't, compromise, that we can't get along with people. There are elements within our country of all different persuasions, of different views, who just think they know the truth, and anyone who doesn't agree with them is evil, and unworthy to be human beings. Humor is designed to break down those walls. It's intended to try to help us look at the world a little differently, and maybe in a little more pleasant manner. So humor has been with us throughout culture. So it's all about all the kinds of things that I've been discussing. Everything that I've discussed in this course about American history and American culture, someone has found a way to laugh about or at it. That's just what people do. We generally, Americans, when we think about the Puritans, we think about the earliest British colonists that came to New England. And they were kind of a group that tended to dress in black. They tended to dress pretty much the same. They were very strict about their views on their particular variety of religion. They were there for religious freedom, for the freedom to be the way they were, not the freedom to be the way someone else is. And they really thought about this a lot. I was actually reading some of the discussions that this particular guy that I'm showing here engaged in. These were times when people could really be witches in the minds of the establishment, and they gave a lot of thought to judging whether someone is a witch or not, and they punished them severely. And we as Americans always feel kind of bad about this era, but then, if you've looked at world history, you know that the same kinds of things were going on in Europe during the same period. That doesn't make any of it right, but it gives you a little more context to how this arrived at. This guy was actually a judge at the Salem witch trials, and so that makes it very clear he had his bad days, but he wrote a lot of funny stuff. He wrote about his life. He had a great deal of difficulty finding a woman to live with that he would be happy with. He was married several times. His wives kept dying. I don't think it was his fault. That was a rough time, a rough period. But nevertheless, he went through a number of wives. He aspired to court certain other ones, and the courtship of Madame Winthrop is kind of a satire. It's not just about himself. It's kind of a way of looking at the predicament of someone who needs to have a spouse, but the choices aren't too good. And but what I enjoyed when I read about him was he made a comment about his own sermons, because in addition to being a judge, he was a minister, and he said of his sermons that my sermon last Sunday was so boring that I fell asleep and I dreamed. I dreamed I was in heaven. Unfortunately, I woke up and found myself in the pulpit. Maybe you had to be there. So, humor for 50, 60 years in America turned largely around this guy. And I think I've left no doubt that I think Benjamin Franklin is one of our most important founding fathers for this country, and one of the more influential thinkers. And while he was not a great general, he was a great thoughtful person. He was a great diplomat. And he started his career, like most Americans up until very quite recently, with no formal education. But he found himself in publishing, and he found he could write things and come up with witty things to say. And he did that for all the years leading, so that by the time of the French and Indian War, he started in the press around 1730. By the time of the French and Indian War, he was a very influential guy. And these are just kind of some examples of some of his observations, which we go, yeah, that pretty much is true. Three may keep a secret if two of them are dead. Okay. And not only is that true in 1730, it's true now. Americans are having issues with people that can't keep secrets all the time. And it does look like it's very true that pretty much no one can keep a secret. When the well's dry, we know the worth of water. This is kind of a view on economics of we tend to value the things that we don't have or we don't have enough of. And that seems to be obvious, but there are some days where economists and politicians lose track of that value is largely determined by the availability of things in society. So that if there's plenty of bread, no one's worried about bread. Bread's fine, it's cheap. But if there's not enough bread to go around, suddenly bread becomes a very important element in our discussions. And this is a world. Nothing can be said to be certain except death and taxes. This is so true of all societies, but it seems so true to Americans, particularly around this time of year when we pay our annual taxes, that people still are saying this, and it still comes up because it's just true. We're going to die, and we're going to pay taxes. It's those inevitable things of life. He wrote a lot of interesting and funny things. One of the funnier satires that he wrote was at the time of the American Revolution or before it. One of the things that the British did, in addition to starting slavery, which created all kinds of problems for us in this country, not in the sense of starting. I mean, slavery is an aspect of world history, but the British introduced slavery to this country because they managed the colonies for 200 years before there was a United States. But he made this observation that the British, in order to help us, are taking all the felons from their prison, putting them on ships and transporting them over here. And this is true. This is what the British did for a couple hundred years. They took all the people that they didn't want. Some of the felons weren't particularly hardcore felons. Probably they were just excess population. But they put them in boats and they sent them to places like the southern colonies in the United States and Australia and New Zealand to basically get them out of England and deal with this surplus population that they had. But his thought was, well, why don't we do them a favor? Because the British basically were saying to the colonists, we're helping you. We're sending you new population. We're sending you additional population. And not all the colonists saw it as a good thing. Again, immigration, ever a popular topic in all countries, and so he suggested, well, why don't we transport some of our snakes back to England, because they are definitely felonious, and I'm sure they will do things well for the British. Okay, so this is humor that it seemed funny to the Americans. The Americans kind of liked the idea of snakes as an example of something in the woods, something in the rough part of the world, that if you mess with it, it's going to bite you. And that's how they kind of chose to think of themselves as, you know, if the British mess with us too much, we're going to bite them. So he kept with the symbolism, using the rattlesnake as a symbol of American intransigence through many years. So his two great causes, and he had many causes, but two great causes that he had that now seem a little odd is he felt that basically the snake should be our national animal. We have many early American flags that had snakes on it that said, "Don't tread on me." But he also believed in the turkey. He believed the turkey should be our national bird. He didn't have a particularly high opinion of the eagle. The eagle is now considered the American symbol, but Franklin preferred the turkey. So during the colonial period, a lot of comic humor in drawings. What we have to remember about this period, and until quite recently, and maybe even in the future, the way things are going, but many people were illiterate, so that the best way to communicate with a large group was with pictures. And yes, I know I keep saying, you know, we'll use pictures a lot in your representations. That's just whether we can read or whether we can write or whether we can understand a language or not. We can all understand pictures if they're presented well enough. So, so comic or funny pictures of odd situations have been part of our history. In this case, it's basically England is the guy with the stick, and he's got his problems, and he's trying to keep his unruly children, the colonists, under control, and apparently not succeeding very well. And this is another one. This is one that Franklin came up with. It basically is one of those kind of cruel jokes on England. England's representation of, you know, Britannia is shown with a lot of its appendages off, which are the colonies, you know, disappearing from the empire. Later on, this is the humor of Mark Twain. Mark Twain had wrote a lot of stories to. I think he's still a very relevant writer, and to understand how Americans view themselves as a group, and some of the issues that Americans wrestle over. Mark Twain is a good place to start, and his stories of Tom Sawyer, and particularly Huck Finn, tell something very real about the period before the American Civil War, and about the attitudes on both sides of the issues that led to that war. This is a story that's more about Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn when they grew up, not specifically by those names. It's actually even kind of autobiographical, but it's about a group of soldiers who are formed in the Confederacy because that's the state they're in, but they choose to keep positioning and repositioning themselves so as not to actually come in conflict with the other side. So this is the private history of a campaign that failed, and basically it to some extent it's about his experience in the Confederate Army for a short period of time before he decided, as so many Americans did, that I think it's time for me to go west. and left the areas of conflict and moved off to, well, different kinds of conflict, but different areas of the country. Coming forward another 100 years, these again until recently, and well, now look at TV, look at the things, the kinds of shows that you see. Sight humor is still very popular, and picking on different people or using different people for humorous situations. One of the most famous and most loved comics is Peanuts, which is about a group of kids. And interestingly enough, they never grow up. They're always 8 or so, but they're always having ridiculous situations, and it's they're fair game. They're you can have anything happen to these crazy kids as long as nothing's too bad, and they get into all kinds of situations. Below that, you have Alley Oop. Alley Oop, they in the 1950s, the idea of cavemen, of people that had lived before historical times, was relatively new for most people, and kind of Alley Oop kind of help people to visualize that period totally inaccurately. There would not have been dinosaurs wandering around at the same time that cavemen were wandering around. But Alley Oop managed to bridge all that with ridiculous situations. And another this is kind of an example of, they didn't think of it being, they still don't think of it as being particularly cruel humor, but one of the groups that it's okay to make fun of are people who live in rural areas, and people particularly who live in mountainous, hilly areas like the Appalachians. And there was a whole series of cartoons about people like that, and they're depicted as being kind of dumb, but they're kind of dumb, and it's okay.
I like the talks.
All right, and I think oh, okay. This must be The Simpsons. Now, The Simpsons are another show that's largely about children, but there's adults in it. And this is one thing about Peanuts. In Peanuts, all you ever see are the children, and the children are funny in their own, and they have their own foibles. In The Simpsons, everybody is funny, everybody is weird. This is a show that's been going on for 35 years, and the children in it, particularly Bart, that you can see there, who's looks like he's about to throw away one of his school books, but and his sister Lisa is nearby. Bart's been in the 5th grade for 35 years, and shows no hope of getting out of the 5th grade. Okay, you don't have to see that one, but it's pretty funny. Okay, it's about time for Ukrainian humor, and I'm hoping that at least some of you have some good examples for us today.